Um, all right, we are recording. So I am happy to introduce our guest speakers for this section, which is called Piloting for Impact. Whoop, so sorry. Turning CX ideas into statewide solutions. Today, we are honored to have Gabriela Durantes and Kristen Urota from Civilla joining us. Gabby is a design director at Civilla with deep expertise in redesigning public benefit systems. She led the research and design behind Michigan's benefits application transformation and now supports similar work in states across the country, including Washington, Missouri, and Connecticut. Her career has focused on building human-centered solutions in government and nonprofit settings to make services more accessible and effective. Kristen is a design lead at Civilla, specializing in service delivery for health and human services. She has supported statewide benefits redesign work in both Missouri and Washington, with a focus on improving applications, renewals, and correspondence. She brings a background in illustration, design, and systems thinking, and now helps introduce Civilla's approach to new agencies and programs nationwide. We have full bios for both of our wonderful presenters on the session page of our conference website. And now that is plenty of me talking. Let's dive in. So take it away, Gabby and Kristen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for the great introduction. We're really excited to be here. So I'm not going to introduce myself, but just again, my name is Gabby. Let me tell you a little bit about Civilla, the organization that Kristen and I work for. So we're a Detroit-based nonprofit design studio that partners with government institutions to improve and streamline access to government services using human-centered design. And we've spent the last decade partnering with health and human services organizations, unemployment insurance agencies, and the Department of Motor Vehicles, amongst a couple other organizations in this pursuit. Some in Michigan, but like Anne mentioned, also in Washington, your state, Missouri, and Connecticut. Just thought it'd be fun for you to get a look at our team. We're a pretty small team of 25 people that are on this mission. We found that the best way to explain our work is with this image that we call the person on the path. And it's probably a reality that's familiar to many of us. Our institutions often spend a lot of time and money building these elaborate brick paths, but then folks like you, myself, and others might find ourselves just building a different path that best suits our needs. And sometimes, as institutions, we get caught up in only focusing on the program, the policy, or the money, all important considerations that do arrive, but in the process might lose sight of the needs of the people we're meant to serve. So what we found at Civilla is that when we spend time up front understanding the user's needs, we build a less expensive, more direct and enduring path that meets the needs of both the users and the institutions that are needing to be served. And so that's just a little bit of Civilla and about how we do our work. Just to orient you, what you can expect from our presentation today, we're going to talk a little bit about what a pilot is, so that we're aligned on what we're talking about. Creating readiness for a pilot, implementation, do a quick recap, and then we'll leave plenty of time for Q&A. Yeah, we just wanted to make sure that we capture all your questions at the end so that we can thoughtfully respond to them. So jumping in. What is a pilot? Before digging into the piloting for impact, we just want to make sure that we're on the same page on how we define a pilot and where it fits in our process. So at Civilla, we typically think about our project in 4 phases. We start off by doing discovery research, where we're really working to understand the journey through user research and best practices. And so this really looks like us spending time with that person on the path, interviewing them, and wanting to better understand their stories and where some of these pain points might fit into their lives. We then move into design and testing, where we design solutions that are meeting user needs and improve them based on feedback. So we take the prototypes out, and we test them, and we iterate on them until we feel like we have a good product. We have found that there's a limit of how much you can learn in a testing environment, and this is really where a pilot is critical. When we pilot, we place the designs in the real world on a small scale to measure and learn what happens when they're used by a higher volume of people in more diverse use cases and in real world conditions. What we found is that pilots play a really crucial role in bridging the gap between ideas and implementation. So a few thoughts that folks might have on what pilots are. Some people think that it's a safe way to experiment without commitment, that it's a way to test out ideas to see what happens. There might be a focus on only quantitative data and numbers, or it might only involve user research. But really what we found is that the point of a pilot is to collect data and information that can be utilized to move you into implementation. And what we found the real value or additional value of pilots can be is that it's really where you start culture change. It's an opportunity to test out a change that's going to happen more widely with a select group of people. You'll start to experience the gradual shifts in the organization through a pilot. And you will also see points of friction that emerge that you'll be better prepared to address when you roll out. In your case, it could be statewide or organization-wide. You'll also be able to start identifying your first internal champions. And this is really where the transfer of ownership begins to the folks that will actually be implementing this organization-wide or statewide and using whatever it is that you've designed, whether it's a product or a business process. And really, the pilot can be the seed for the successful implementation. Like I mentioned, there's the points of friction that wouldn't have come up in a testing environment that will emerge. There will be gaps in the business process that you had outlined before piloting in a testing environment that all of a sudden will, just emerge as you're in the real world. There's communications or training that you will have a chance to better understand and address so that when you are getting ready to implement, you can make modifications to the way you trained or communicated the pilot to pilot staff and other stakeholders. And so it's a really low stakes way for you to get a head start on that. What we thought would be helpful is, as we're talking through this, is to root you in two case studies. One of them will be in the Michigan redesign of the application that Anne mentioned. So for context, when we prepared to do our first pilot in the state of Michigan, it was around the new integrated benefits application. And Michigan used to have the longest public benefits form in the country. And what we did was redesign the application to be more user-friendly, 80% shorter, much simpler, and integrated several programs. But one of the things that we needed to do is make sure that to pilot it, it met policy requirements. And so this meant making sure that the application was able to meet the requirements of the 1,700 pages of departmental policy. We also had to go through 6 months of the policy and legal reviews to ensure that all of the requirements were met, not just at the federal level, but also state and departmental. And one of the things we found was that it was the first time that some of these policy teams were actually working together. So there was a lot of just getting folks to not be working in a siloed way, but actually bringing them together. So that was for the Michigan pilot. Most recently, we were partnering with some folks in the state of Washington, and we ran a 2-week pilot last year in 2024 where we piloted, similar to Michigan, a paper integrated benefits application. There were 4 agencies involved, and we had to make sure that, again, there were requirements that were aligned, that there were some data sharing agreements. We were able to integrate various safety net programs into one prototype application. And so we'll be referencing both of these pilots through the presentation, just to give you some concrete examples of what we're talking about. So I'm going to pass it over to Kristen so that she can talk a little bit about what it looks like to create readiness for a pilot.
Thanks, Gabby. So, you may have heard the old saying that those who plan or those who fail to plan, plan to fail. And while no one really sets out on a project planning to fail, poor planning or having no plan at all really can make the difference between an amazing victory or a tragic loss. And so we're not going to sugarcoat it. Pilots take time and effort to plan. It could take anywhere between 3 to 6 months, depending on the complexity and amount of coordination that needs to be done. So before you get into the weeds of designing a pilot, it does help to take some time to determine whether or not you're ready for it and you have the foundational pieces to take on a pilot in the first place. So a first step, it really does help to take some time to determine whether or not you have project leadership and operational support for the pilot that you're hoping to run. And so some things that you can make sure to look to see if you have first is definitely trained up team members who are committed to seeing the pilot through from start to finish. This should include directors, deputies, project sponsors, and even project leads who have the capacity to dedicate at least 50% of their time to the pilot. You should also look to see if you have leadership that is ready to navigate cultural change. Channels of communication so you can share the what, the why, the when, the where, and the how behind the pilot. And then also make sure you have time and resources to develop the plan, but also synthesize the findings after the pilot is done. So as Gabby shared, the purpose of a pilot is not to answer, does this solution work, or to play the role of extending user testing. Instead, a pilot really does help to answer, what can we expect when this rolls out? So depending on the problem that you're looking to solve, in-depth user testing may actually be enough to create confidence for a change, and a pilot may be a little too much. So knowing when to pilot and when to user test instead is crucial for effectively evaluating and refining new initiatives, as well as being good stewards of the time and resources that you have. So if you do have a solution that has been thoroughly tested and you have leadership and operational resources, you're likely well positioned to take on a pilot. But if getting leadership and operational support now or in the near future seems like a stretch, your solution is still testing poorly with your end users, or you want to target a very small demographic, further user testing might actually be a better fit. But let's say in this situation, you've got your team assembled, you have your operational bases covered. So now you and your team will want to start strategizing on the following pilot criticals. First, articulating a North Star goal in clear, succinct statements, which describe your objectives for the pilot. Planning a pilot experience that centers voices from your end users who will be operationalizing or participating in your pilot. Onboarding and training those who will support and operationalize your pilot, ideally using an in-person peer-to-peer training model or another proven approach. And so Gabby and I are going to walk through each of these activities. So we'll first start with aligning on your goals as a pilot team and finding your North Star. So when we say North Star, we're defining it as a goal that is clear and compelling, that has a vision that will help guide all aspects of your pilot. And so this North Star should serve as the central reference point for your stakeholders and your team. And you'll continually return back to it for alignment and inspiration. Don't skip over this because maybe you think the North Star is obvious or it doesn't need to be articulated for your team. This really is a crucial step that will either set you up for success or it will become a reoccurring thorn throughout your pilot. And to just share, why we emphasize starting out with the North goal, it really is crucial for these several reasons. It ensures that all stakeholders, from leadership to staff to end users, to participants, they're all aligned on the common objective that they're working towards together. It helps focus, prioritize activities, decisions, and resources. A compelling North Star goal inspires and motivates stakeholders towards the why for what you're trying to achieve with the pilot. And it provides a consistent vision to anchor into when changes and challenges arise. And so maybe you think you're not creative, you can't craft a North Star goal. It really is possible for all people. It can feel like an art form at times, but as a best practice, we encourage you to aim for your North Star goal to be clear, so it's easily understood by all stakeholders, compelling, so it motivates and inspires action, connected to ensure it relates back to your larger project goal, as well as simple and summarized, ideally within 1 to 2 sentences. So I wanted to share that, creating a North Star goal is a great way to begin collaborating with partners, stakeholders, other collaborators to understand their needs and co-create a compelling vision together. And so when we planned the pilot in Washington, these were the guiding questions that we started with to help gather input from each organization to help build alignment. And so feel free to use these questions as well as a starting point to get your own conversations rolling. So ask yourself in your group, if we could only understand one thing from this pilot, what will it be? What questions can this pilot answer? And what questions can't it answer? What a North Star language can we align on for strong, clear, consistent communication? And another pro tip, there will be many, many wonderful options and opinions and ideas about what the goal should be. And there may be a number of things that you're really eager to discover in the pilot. But where there is flaring, there should be focus. So as much as possible, resist boiling the ocean or trying to accomplish too many things in a single pilot. The more defined and articulate you can get in your goal, the greater impact your pilot will have. So we're gonna pause for a moment to just do a quick short exercise to practice what a quality North Star goal looks like. So on this slide are 3 goal statements that we've used for pilots in the past. We want to see if you can identify which ones they are. We'll give you a few seconds before showing the answer on the next slide.
Sorry, for the interpreter, on the slide, you said there's how many? You're just talking so fast. I apologize.
There's 3 of them.
3
Sorry about that.
out of 6. Okay, thank you.
All right, we can go to the next slide. So these are the 3 that are North Star goals that we've used in previous pilots. So if you've got them correct, great job. So we'll give you some tips for writing your own North Star goal. So as you're getting the group ready, here are some tips for things that we found helpful. The first is to start at the end. So imagine the successful completion of the pilot. What does success look like? What pain points did you solve? What impacts on your target user did you have? And how did they feel? So consider the ultimate impact of what you want to achieve. Then write down your core objectives. Based on the desired outcome, articulate the purpose of the pilot. So what problem are you addressing? What is the main goal that you want to achieve? And if you can clearly describe the positive change or improvement that will result from achieving your North Star goal, that will help you narrow down what your statement will be. Remember to keep humans at the center for number 3. As you iterate on your statement, remember to return to your end users and their needs and experiences. And 4, tie it back to your project goal. So ultimately, the pilot goal you write should relate back to your bigger research goal. And so after your North goal is finalized, make sure to integrate it into all aspects of the pilot to support decision-making, resource allocation, communications, as well as stakeholder engagement. So then on this next slide, we just have some photos from our pilot in Washington. When we did pilot, the following tips we just shared, we followed as well. We spent a number of meetings hearing from organizations and leaders within those organizations to understand their wishes for the pilot. We also worked to ensure that voices from the field were lifted up in the conversations as well. And so what came out of all of those conversations was this goal to empower improvement in access and enrollment by learning from the integrated applications impact. And so that looks like using data and insights to strengthen current paper and online systems and guide future integration strategies to advance Washington's vision of a more connected, accessible experience for Washingtonians. And from here, I'll pass it on to Gabby, and she'll walk us through about designing the pilot experience.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, so now that you've defined your North Star goal, you'd be ready to start designing the pilot experience. And this is really where you'll get into the weeds and start selecting staff and sites to host and operationalize your pilot. You'll be creating detailed plans for any new business processes, and you'll be ensuring that all elements are in place for a smooth launch. There are three critical components that we want to bring your attention to. The first one is who is part of the pilot. You need to identify who you need to train and onboard to help operationalize your pilot. We recommend that you take a lot of care and thought into choosing the different pilot sites for the where. So where it takes place is really important. You want to make sure that the conditions are there to make your pilot a success. The selection of experienced and committed staff is also really important, as their engagement and feedback is crucial throughout the pilot. We recognize that in a org-wide or statewide rollout, there will be a bell curve of folks that are committed or excited, which is okay. So you will most likely also have those types of folks in your pilot. That can actually also be really helpful. And finally, the how. So what will the business processes look like, and who will help you build it? What will you need to modify for your pilot? And what will be able to stay the same? At this point in the design and research process, you should also have deep knowledge of the existing business processes that you will either be piloting a solution in or piloting to improve on. So it's really important to be able to pilot a process that has detailed descriptions of the steps, tasks, and workflows that will be followed with the end users, specifically those who will be most familiar with the process and who is going to be responsible for operationalizing the bulk of your pilot. So let's dive in a little bit deeper. Starting with the who and where, when narrowing down your options for participants and sites, we recommend you consider the following three things. One is diversity and representation, so choosing diverse sites so that the pilot captures a wide range of experiences and challenges. The second one is capacity and capability, selecting sites with the capacity to fully participate. We don't recommend that you choose a site where there's a big change already happening, because that will just lead to change fatigue, and it'll be distracting for folks to really be fully in the pilot. And finally, engagement and ownership, so involving a diverse range of experience and skilled participants. So to root this in an example, going back to the pilot that we did in Washington, we piloted with 3 different pilot sites. It was 2 offices and 1 community organization. We were in King South with a large health and human service office in an urban environment in Western Washington. Moses Lake, a medium office in rural Eastern Washington, and a community partner, Better Health Together, a nonprofit community healthcare organization in Spokane. It was really helpful that these locations were not only in different places, but they served different populations. Their setup was different. And in the case of Better Health Together, they were a community partner who were also helping folks access benefits, but they weren't an office themselves. And so the relationship that the clients coming in had with that staff was different than going into an office with a caseworker, for example. Moving on to the how, we recommend that you're building the business processes with the end users for various reasons. One is their expertise and insight. End users are the experts, and they possess valuable insights into what worked well and what doesn't. The second is practicality and feasibility. So involving end users ensures that the business process is practical and feasible. In our experience, we've found that sometimes there's a business process that we're given on paper of the way things operate, but when you actually go and see it in action, there's all sorts of workarounds and other things that are not accounted for in the official business process. And so if you're building this with the folks that are in it and they're showing you how things currently work, you'll be able to catch those things as you're designing the business process for your pilot. And finally, buy-in and ownership. When end users are involved in developing the business process, they're more likely to feel a sense of ownership and buy-in because they helped create it. So one thing that we thought might be a helpful pause before we move into training is just a little bit of a reflection prompt. As you begin designing a pilot experience, if you're thinking about something that you're wanting to pilot where in your organization, whether it's a business process change or introducing something new, like a new tool, how can you ensure that the insights and expertise of end users are involved in designing the process? I'll just give you 30 seconds to jot down any thoughts or think about what that might look like. One thing I'll add is that if the pilot is designed well, you will be able to have your users focus on the new process and the experience or the product itself instead of the design of the pilot. And that's really what you're aiming for here in this co-design process. So I'm going to pass it over to Kristen now to talk about training and support.
All right. So when it comes to training and the quality of it, it should be considered its own design product. And so spending the time on training, communication, and onboarding and not doing at the last minute is really critical in setting staff up for success in the pilot and for the eventual rollout. And so over the years, we've found the following best practices really support high quality and engaged training. And so the first on the list is to design training sessions that are interactive and hands-on. And I think, Gabby, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. And this could include simulations like role playing and real life scenarios that allow staff to practice the new procedures in a controlled environment. And so we found that interactive and hands-on training really helps people better understand and retain this new information by applying what they're learning in practical and relevant situations. And so the second one is to break down the training into modules that can cover different aspects of the pilot. And so instead of giving people, the fire hose of information, modular learning really makes it easier to absorb and retain that information that you're sharing. It also allows for accessibility and flexibility in training by accommodating different learning paces. And so the third practice is to develop support materials and a system for continuous feedback. And so this could look like regular check-ins, Q&A sessions, and access to a help desk or job aids to support the team. And so continuous feedback and support materials really do help address any issues or questions promptly. And it will just enhance staff confidence and competence in the new procedures. And so then the fourth practice is to involve experienced staff or subject matter experts in delivering the training. So especially if frontline staff will be helping you operationalize your pilot, having experienced trainers and staff and respected leaders run training can really enhance the credibility and relevance of what you're teaching through peer-to-peer training. We found this really effective in multiple states. And so, we emphasize that designing training intentionally, as we've seen what happens when training is rushed or treated as an afterthought. If that happens, staff may make more errors, leading to inefficiencies and potential harm to users. Staff may lack confidence when participating. Inadequate training can affect the reliability and validity of the pilot's findings. And staff may become disengaged, less committed, and dismiss your solutions, which ultimately will impact your success. And so now it's your turn We'd love you to just spend a few moments just reflecting on what we've been sharing, looking back and thinking about your own training experiences. What training that you've done was memorable? What was painful and maybe something you would never want to do again or wish on your worst enemy? How did it embody any human-centered design principles? And how can we think about training as an experience and not as an afterthought? So we'll just give you a few moments to think about that. And then Gabby will walk us through some of our thoughts that we have around implementation.
All righty. So thinking about implementation, one of the things that we want to emphasize is that pilots are a great place of learning, but there's really no amount of piloting that's going to eliminate all uncertainties. After all, it's just a small test of what you can expect when you roll out organizationally or statewide. The goal really of a pilot is to gather enough evidence that the solution is effective and viable, and it's an opportunity to point out what you'll need to keep iterating on after rollout. So just like with testing, there really is a limit to how much you can learn from a sample size. And at the end of the day, it will require you to be brave or your organization and take that leap. We really recommend that once you launch into implementation, you have time set aside to closely monitor how the change is being received so that you can continue to make tweaks and adjustments. What we found in partnering with large government institutions is that there's really often a desire for this complete certainty before committing to implementation. But waiting for perfect conditions can be counterproductive. And what we found, especially in the type of work that government does, is that perfect conditions may never come. So it's really important to become comfortable with a degree of ambiguity and recognize that there's no amount of piloting that will be able to eliminate all uncertainties. What we really think is that the key is to reach a point where the pilot has provided enough evidence that the solution is effective. It's de-risking what it means to actually launch fully. And it should be showing that there is viability and that there are governance processes in place that exist so that you can continue to iterate on the product or the process after a rollout. There's a couple of ways that we think you can know when you're ready for implementation. If your pilot is consistently producing positive results across different sites and groups, that's a sign that you are ready to go towards implementation. If there are significant issues that are being identified in the pilot and they're being resolved, if there are key stakeholders that are supportive and engaged, and if the data collected from the pilot provides an understanding of the solution's effectiveness, benefits, and potential challenges. We understand that you or maybe your leaders will feel risk adverse, and that's okay. We really recognize and think that this world needs both risk averse thinkers to keep the rest of us from leaping off too many cliffs. And we understand that the transition into implementation can be daunting. But what we found, especially when partnering with government agencies, is that when people's quality of lives are at stakes, it's really worth the effort to jump into something that's going to potentially improve the lives of millions of people. One of the things that we just want to caution against is that there is a risk to prolonged or excessive piloting. We've seen that it can lead to stagnation, where there's endless piloting that's halting progress and momentum. It can lead to wasted resources, so time, money, and personnel that could be better used in implementation are being asked to recreate a pilot in an artificial environment that's really taking a lot of time and effort and not going towards implementation. 3, it can reduce credibility. So extending the pilot phase can really make your words and plans appear less credible. And this is one that I really want to emphasize, the loss of trust with the folks that have been part of the pilot, who have the potential of becoming your first and biggest champions, will inevitably move on from the effort if it's not going into implementation. And this can create missed opportunities too. Delaying implementation means missing out on the potential improvements and efficiencies that the solution can bring. And finally, which I think I've mentioned this one throughout because it's probably the one that we've just seen be impacted the most, is the loss of trust. If you're running without an end goal in sight, that can really erode the trust of the folks you've asked to participate in the pilot, or the folks that you've talked to in your research, that you've gotten their input on designing something that is meant to provide an improvement in services or the way they're accessing benefits, in the case of some of the projects that we've done. So we know that was a lot of content. I'm going to ask Kristen to do a little bit of a recap of what we've talked about, and then we've left plenty of time for Q&A. We'd love to hear from you.
Okay, so in conclusion, be sure to keep your North Star goal clear, compelling, connected, and simple. Beware of trying to do too much in a single pilot. Be sure to involve end users from the start in designing the business process. Beware of dismissing the wealth of expertise that is available to you. Be sure to design training that is interactive, dynamic, timely, and peer-to-peer. Beware of overlooking the training experience and launching it at the last minute. Be sure to use pilots to gain confidence in your solution before rollout, and beware of eroding the trust of your end users by delaying implementation. All right, and I think that's all that we have, so we'll just break for some Q&A.
Right. Well, first, thank you all so much. This is just a wealth of information, and you all have so much experience going out and actually like doing the stuff that you're talking about. And so I can just like feel the wisdom and all the lessons learned, as hard as some of them might have been, in all of the information you shared. So thank you so much. All right, we have some questions coming in, and please, as y'all in the audience have more questions, please pop them in the Q&A. So let's start going through them. Kristen asks, can you talk about how to identify the right user group to target with a pilot, such as size and composition of that group?
I think, Gabby, is it helpful to look at maybe what was done for reform, and if I can speak if there's like differences of what we did in Washington?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think what the first thing to think about in a pilot is that it's going to be a sample size. And so you want to try to target a sample size that's going to represent the majority of the users. For example, in Michigan, there are 120 offices that issue benefits. And we knew that even piloting in just one office was going to be pretty disruptive to the rest of the state. And so we were able to get the leadership team to agree to 2 separate offices. And the 2 main groups of folks in Michigan in terms of just geography is there is urban offices and rural offices. And the way that the populations that they serve and the user needs, that was like one of the categories. And so we knew we needed to find an office in a rural environment and one in a urban environment. The other thing that was lifted up is there are areas of Michigan that are extremely diverse. There's actually a city inside of Detroit called Hamtramck that is, I think, the 2 most diverse square miles or something in the country. There's so many languages that are spoken. And so right away that became a potential pilot site because it just represented so many different cultures and languages and a lot of diversity. There is also a large population that does farming, but not in Southeast Michigan. And so we looked at a more rural site that also in the summer has an influx of migrant workers. And I'll say there's a lot of similarities between Washington and Michigan. So those were actually similar filters that we used to when identifying the pilot sites in Washington State with the King South office in Spokane. And we wanted to make sure to be able to speak to and pilot with several folks. And so in Michigan, we had a pilot that lasted a month. In Washington, it was 2 weeks. But we did look at the numbers of how many people were coming in to apply for benefits to be able to determine where we'd be able to get a good sample size of a higher volume. And so also thinking about the time of the year that the pilot was, the time of the month that it was, when we know that there might be an influx. Those are some of the things that we considered, and just working closely with leadership and frontline staff to make sure that we're all aligned on what do we mean by diverse and what would be a good sample size that we're capturing all of the different folks either in the pilot or at least in the user research so that we have a sense of the type of people that in the case of the public benefits application pilots that it would represent the types of folks that would be coming in. I don't know, Kristen, if there's anything you want to add.
Yeah, I think definitely wanting to make sure that if the product is supposed to be serving a large group of people, we want to focus on diversity to make sure that we're getting input from a lot of different, experiences and people with different, from different walks of life in a sense. I think in some cases too, the constraints that you have that you're focused on either in the pilot or because it's just something that's naturally occurring in the planning process, that also kind of informs like who your target audience is. So in the case of Washington, because the application that we had, we were only at the time piloting an English application. We were filtering for people whose preferred language was English or they were comfortable enough navigating an English application. And so we wouldn't necessarily at that time, try to get people who might struggle with English. But if you have an application that you're piloting in multiple languages, that just expands who your target users could be.
Thank you. Since a lot of us are in Washington State, and you've talked briefly about this project, some of the where and the how. Can we hear a little bit more about how the Washington pilot went? What did you learn? What were some takeaways?
Yeah, I think it went well. I can't remember the exact number of applications that we received overall. But from the 3 locations that we were at, I want to say, Gabby, was it like around 100 applications maybe?
A little bit over 100.
Yeah, and so we did learn a lot, and a lot of it also confirmed things that we were already hearing in user testing. So we can't say that, there was this big surprise that we weren't expecting. Because of the level of depth of user testing that we were doing before we piloted, we did see that multiple people there's a large majority of Washingtonians coming into these service centers looking to apply for multiple programs. And so that was confirmed in data that predated us. We saw that in our user testing, and we saw the same thing as well in the pilot. And so that was a great case for people need an integrated experience, both in paper as well as online. And there's also benefits of us residents being able to access multiple benefits from one location instead of I can only go to this place to apply for this program, and I can only go to this place to apply for this program. And so, yeah, there's a ton of neat learnings that we experienced at that time.
Thank you. Let's see. Kimberly writes, in one of the slides you mentioned know when to pilot and know when to user test. Are these two different methods different? And can you use user testing during the pilot? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I would say in user testing that is more around, and Gabby, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but thinking about like I have a lo-fi prototype and I'm trying to get a lot of information around it so I can rapidly evolve it and iterate on it. Whereas in the pilot, it's really you have a more high fidelity product that you're putting into the live environment. So in user testing, those are more simulated experiences where maybe if I'm sitting with a resident and I'm asking them to fill out an application, I'm telling them use fake information, like don't give us your real name and your private information. We're asking them questions throughout the process. But when we're piloting, we're not talking a client through how to fill out the application. We're sitting back observing them as if, it is a real environment. So they're filling out the real information. They're handing it to a staff member to process for their actual benefits. And so you're not going to really do that in user testing. I don't know if there's anything that you would add, Gabby.
Yeah, I think, and for the example with public benefits applications, we're user testing with folks that have received benefits in the past or recently applied. And so they can tell us like, oh, this is how I'm coming in and I'm worried that, I'm not going to have food on the table for my children. And that's why I'm filling out the application and I feel anxious. And so I might take this question this way or that way. So it's rooted in their experience. But when you have someone actually coming into the office and using the application to apply for food for their family, they don't have to put themselves in that situation or try to imagine what it felt like. They're living in it. And so one of the things that is really helpful in the case of the application where we were piloting that is we didn't intervene at all when they were filling out the application or anything. They were asked to participate in an optional survey and we talked to them afterward. What was that like for you? Can you walk us through? Did you get stuck anywhere? And their feedback is just it's so raw because they're living in it. And there's just so many things that we can learn in that way. And from the caseworker perspective and the business side, it's also not theoretical information of how would you put this in. They're actually putting in the data into their work environment and they're telling us, this is confusing. I can't find this. And again, you can simulate the environment, but it's not the same as when you're actually doing it. So both are really important. We always encourage that you use your test before going into piloting. And then piloting is just a more real world experience of user testing in a way.
I would add too, like there have been times during a pilot where if something is really, really going wrong and we're just seeing like something's not working, we'll fix it in the middle of the pilot. It's not like we're just gonna roll with it and just struggle through it. And so that's the only time where like it kind of switches a little bit towards like, oh, the user testing of it isn't going so well. So let's make an iteration and then continue on with the pilot.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a perfect segue into my next question. What factors do you take into consideration on whether to end or extend a pilot?
I think we spend quite a bit of time trying to figure out what the right amount of the pilot is. So we've actually never had to, I think maybe we've run 8 pilots for different types of projects, and we've never had to extend or shorten them. But what that means is that there's quite a bit of planning up front to align on what are the metrics that we're trying to collect and making sure that the amount of time is reasonable for that. What are the number of, in this case, like how many applications are we trying to get in? How many iterations of the product are we trying to make as we're going through? And it's usually a lot of the data from pilots. There's some that you can collect live as you're going through, and there's some impacts, and especially in the case of applications that you might not be able to see right away. You have to wait for the data to trickle in. And in the case of a public benefits application, you have to wait for the determination to know someone was approved or denied, and then you can see how much of an impact that this redesign have. And so um, yeah, I think it's more of like, what are the things you're trying to hit and making sure that you're aligned on that when determining the pilot length. And we've never had to shorten it. I do think maybe at a minimum, we've never had a pilot that's shorter than 2 weeks because just for you have to plan for a couple of days for folks to just readjust to the business process or the product. And so there's a little bit of a lag before you really see people understand it and start using it in the way that it would once it's implemented and in the live stream. So we want to make sure you have enough time on the front end and to be able to work out any kinks and make updates. So 2 weeks is the minimum pilot we've had. I don't think we would recommend having a pilot that's longer than probably 6 weeks would be the limit because again, like it is asking a lot of folks. And in the case of pilots we've done with government partners, it's usually taking folks away from something else. And it's just too big of an ask. So I would say between 2 and 4 weeks is the sweet spot. 6 weeks is too long.
All right, we have a couple questions going back to the who we're piloting with. So let me read both of them. So Jennifer says, in Washington, our care assessment for the developmental disability community services clients we serve is not very sensitive to the support needs of the neurodiverse individuals. How do you embrace the support needs of neurodiversity and other communication differences in designing piloting projects? And I feel like that's pretty related to the next question, which is any tips for finding characteristics that differentiate one user group from another without making assumptions or stereotypes?
Mhm.
I'd say for me that probably it goes all back to user testing and your initial like research. Like you're going to be able to find those out if you're making space for the people that you're seeking out to share their experience. And if you're listening well to them, they will help you shape how their experience should be in the pilot or like in the product that you end up developing. So I'd probably say like if that feels like a gap that if there's some level of uncertainty of how do I support, neurodiverse individuals, go to them, seek them out, listen to them, let them tell their stories, let them tell you what their needs are, and then apply that into what you're looking to produce. I don't know, Gabby, if there's additional.
Yeah, when we're getting ready to, like I shared at the one of the very first slides, the pilot comes after we've done user research and testing. So when we're pulling together just the beginning work plan and the research plan, we spend time with folks at different levels of the organization we're partnering with, leadership, frontline staff, community partners, to get a sense from them of who do you think the users are. And oftentimes they will lift up the different groups that they're interacting with and some of the unique challenges. And so as we're pulling together our research plan, one of the things that we work to do is make sure that we involve community partners as some folks that can help us recruit interviewees to make sure that we bake in their perspective. And so we recognize that, like in the case of Washington or in Michigan or any other state we've worked with, there might be specific needs that that need to be lifted up, and community partners or the folks that are sometimes in the case of public benefits caseworkers will tell us these are some of the folks that are coming in and these are some of the issues that they have, and it feels like what we have really, really doesn't work for them. And so can you focus on trying to identify what their unique needs are so that that can be taken into account in the design? And what we found is that when you design for the smaller, more unique user groups, that is often also helpful for a wider variety of folks. So we really, yeah, encourage that starts from the very beginning in when you're planning your research and defining who your users are.
Thank you both for that. I just keep coming back to the theme of this conference, and you guys just like keep saying it, which is like just listening deeper. Like, how are we going to the people who we are trying to serve? How are we hearing them, right? It cannot be overstated. All right, this one really hits at my data loving heart. How do you define metrics for a pilot? So what does success look like, and how many things do you measure to determine if, if you have the green light to move forward?
Yeah, I think for metrics, it is definitely focusing on what will actually serve your product and give you the information that you need to roll it out, and avoiding like fluff metrics. Fortunately, with the time crunch, like some fluff right now isn't coming to mind, but we've done multiple exercises where we do kind of like a 4x4 of like, what's the impact? What's the effort that this would take? Is it easy to get this data, or is it difficult? And there is like, that going through that exercise of, if something's really hard to get because maybe your, system doesn't have that data to be able to pull it for baseline or something, or you can't collect it during the pilot, but it's also not going to make a large impact in the findings or what you need to implement, then toss that aside. Don't worry about that. Focus on the data that's easy and accessible to get, but will show you high impact of or like results for what you're doing in the pilot. Yeah, that's where it's like, it's really like trying to focus and get a little bit minimalist in some cases.
All right. I think we can probably fit in one more real quick. You talked about the three non-North Star goals. What made them poor?
Yeah. So let me pull back up on those. So one, like, for a North Star goal said, enhance access to affordable housing. That doesn't explain like why, how are you going to do that? What are the methods or approaches of doing that? Who's actually going to be impacted if you do this? So it's, seems like more of a something that you can aspire to, but it doesn't actually describe the momentum that you're going to take to get there and what the result of that will be. Increase awareness of benefit programs by next year. Great. How are you going to do that? Why? Who? How? Increase the number of new participants enrolled in state provided programs. How many participants? Which state programs? There's a level where it's just pretty surface level and vague. And so some of the other ones, like build new ways to streamline access to energy assistance. Energy assistance is pretty specific. Streamlining access is like a focus, and moving towards greater stability with dignity. That's something that's inspirational, and it gets at the heart of the human, of improving this process in order to provide stability and dignity. That's something that I can get behind a lot more than enhance access for affordable housing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for all your wealth of information that you have shared today, for answering these wonderful questions. Thank you for everyone for attending and sharing your thoughts, comments, questions with us. Thank you to our ASL interpreter 7-star, to our closed captioner, and please, please, please take a moment as you exit out of this Zoom to answer our 3 quick feedback questions, letting us know how we did today. We are always looking to improve these sessions for you all. Thank you again, Gabby. Thank you, Kristen, and we are excited to see you soon. Have a great day, everyone.